All right. You know what it is? You know who it is? We're back. Today I got Mary Mick. She's a registered dietitian, part of the family, and she's my cousin Jerry's girlfriend, who I work on with a lot of stuff, but also a very smart person in terms of nutrition. So I wanted to have her on today to discuss about kind of her background in nutrition. I've never actually sat down and talked to a registered dietitian, so it might be nice to have that conversation. And yeah, just kind of just talk a lot about nutrition. So I don't know if you want to introduce yourself in any way, but go from there.
Hey, yes. Hello, I'm Mary, and I am a registered dietitian nutritionist. I just became a dietitian this year, just a few months ago, and passed my exam. And I'm really looking forward to being in this kind of field.
Cool. And you went to Syracuse, right?
Cuse.
Yes.
Yes, I went to Syracuse for my undergrad, and then I went to the University of Massachusetts Amherst for my internship.
Cool. All right. Awesome. So I guess we'll start with you telling us about yourself. Don't have to go into too much detail. We guess we can streamline this into the part where you kind of figured out you were going into nutrition, and then whatever growing up caused you to kind of go down that path of being a registered dietitian and being interested in nutrition in general.
Yeah, it's been a long journey. So it's kind of funny whenever I get this question because I feel like I have so many answers to this, like I said, because it was such a journey to get here. So I have always been interested in nutrition and food. And if we were to like throw it back, there was a girl on my MySpace account. I don't know why I had a MySpace as like a tween, but she posted this video called Meet Your Meat on my wall or page or whatever the heck
Mhm.
you would call it at the time. And I watched it, and essentially it brought light to what the meat industry was. And I had no idea. I think a lot of times kids especially think like chicken is not really chicken. They don't really put the two together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So long story short, I was like horrified. I love animals and all of that. And so I that's when I kind of heard the difference between a vegan and vegetarian. And I heard through this video, it was probably by PETA, I think, that being vegan was like the best for the animals. So I was 13 and I told my mom, hey, mom, I'm going vegan. And then I had cereal that day. So I wasn't vegan that day. I
Well,
realized vegan
at
was
that point, you have to put two and two together in terms of like when you're just learning that. It's like, all right,
right. I'm like, I'm going to be radical and do this. And then I'm like, oh, wait,
yeah,
I kind of can. So she didn't believe me for a long time. So she kept like making chicken and stuff like that. And then I was like, no, mom, I'm going to be vegetarian. She's like, oh, whatever. I'm like, I'm not kidding. So I've always kind of had this interest in the food industry in general.
mhm,
And then that, of course, ties in with nutrition. So when I was in cheerleading in high school, I remember exactly where I was. And I told this girl who was a grade above me that I wanted to go into nutrition and study it. And she's like, in this economy, people won't hire a nutritionist. And I'm like, you're right. Which looking back, I'm like, why would I ever trust like a sophomore or a junior in high school on the economy? So I was like, you're right. So I really just ended up studying a ton of things in school. It really was when I took a semester off of school that I had time to just have clarity of mind of like, what do I really want to do? What do I always think about? What is something that I think is important and essential to everybody? And that was nutrition. So
mhm.
I decided to continue school at SU and go down the dietetics path.
Cool. All right, that's
Yeah.
awesome. What and was there? I guess speaking about like specifically, like those were the specific points. Was there a specific point when you? Because what are the options for becoming a dietitian? Is there like levels to it? Like, is there like a lower level or do you have like a master's? Do you need a master's?
No, I have a bachelor's. So
Yeah.
that's a really good question. So when you become a dietitian, you have to have an undergrad degree as well as what we call a dietetic internship, which people are like, what the heck is that? But
Mhm.
it's pretty much a residency for at least a year
All
of doing different rotations
right.
and then passing an exam. Um, I guess if you're kind of like more or less educate if there's more or less education behind that. If you, for example, study nutrition, but you don't take the exam and you don't do the year internship, you can be like a diet tech. And so you have like a little bit more limited options than a registered dietitian. And then it's been optional to do a master's beyond that, so you can like teach or do research or whatever. But as of very, very recently, it's required to do a master's.
Okay.
So I was on the cusp of doing it or not. And at this point, it was just kind of a finance thing for me of a
Yeah.
master's. So I do intend to eventually get it. But yeah, as long as you do the internship and you have an undergrad in nutrition at this point, you're able to be a dietitian.
Cool. All right. And then I want to kind of talk about, because I think that there's a misunderstanding on what the difference between a nutritionist and a registered dietitian is, and kind of um, I guess the little intricate details of what makes the other different from one another. Obviously, the education and the like level of education. There's specific things I'll let you go into detail about, like what a dietitian can do that a nutritionist can't, and then depending on like where you live and that stuff. So, kind of give us a brief overview of what the difference is between like a registered dietitian or someone like myself who has a precision nutrition level 1 certification. So, it's a very in-depth certification and probably one of the best that you can get, but like I still can't do certain things obviously that you can. So go on there.
Yeah, so I think just to put it out there, I think for the everyday person to know the definition of a dietitian is very unlikely.
Yeah.
So when people say nutritionist, like I think technically they mean dietitian.
Yeah.
And so that's why some of us go by RDN, registered dietitian nutritionist,
Mhm.
because when people like in everyday hear that, they hear the nutritionist part, but they can also add it to the registered dietitian, right?
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned, you have to have at least a 4-year bachelor's degree in kind of the area of nutrition. It could even be in um like sometimes different undergrads have different focuses, but otherwise it is nutrition.
Mhm.
Again, that 1-year dietetic internship, you could prolong it a bit, but the experience in that is 1,200 mandatory supervised hours in
Yeah.
various nutrition settings. So that ranges from clinical, hospital care, food service. So, for example, schools, community nutrition, which might be like at a WIC location. And then personally, in my internship, we had kind of more miscellaneous ones. So I did like retail dietetics. So I worked at like a grocery store. You could do an acute care setting or a like geriatric setting, things like that. Of course, you have to pass a national exam that is given to you at the end of your internship. And then you have continuing education hours every year. So I think in the course of 5 years, you need 75 hours of continuing ed. And that's by going to different seminars and webinars and reading papers and things like that. So comparing that to a nutritionist, I say nutritionist is kind of like if you say I'm an environmentalist.
Okay.
Like that doesn't really mean anything. It might mean you enjoy that field, but that doesn't say, hey, I'm certified by a governing body kind of
Yeah.
thing. Kind of like you mentioned, you said that you have a certification of some sort through precision nutrition.
Yeah.
I think that's really good to have these happy mediums between the two because the internship is long
Yeah.
and it's rigorous and it's usually expensive.
Mhm.
So for people like who might be working and want to really understand nutrition and be credible, there are different certifications out there for them to pursue too, which is great.
Yeah. Cool. And like, I guess the biggest thing is because there's oftentimes um, like specifics, and I kind of go as deep as you want to with this, but I know like the baseline of the differences that you can do. Like you can actually prescribe like meal plans like legally, and you can prescribe like specific things that you think a client needs in terms of supplementation with like depending on the state and whatnot. I'm pretty sure. Um, that like try to. I want you to dive a little bit into that so they know like what the actual like what it is that makes you a step above that, because obviously the education and everything like that makes you a step above that, but in terms of like what you can actually legally give to someone for a diet or nutritional advice, and kind of go from there.
Yeah. So like you said, it kind of depends state to state. So you can be registered, that part of registered dietitian, but some states needs licensure too. So that's
Okay.
just another step. I guess focusing in like a clinical setting, if you were to be able to like prescribe someone a renal diet with kidney disease, a dietitian is the only one that can do that. If you were like a nutrition specialist or a diet tech, you would not be able to prescribe it. So just like a doctor can prescribe medicine, a dietitian can prescribe a medical diet.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to more, I guess, not so clinical settings, it does vary a bit because, like, you at a gym, you might have a dietitian, but you might have a nutritionist or a certified nutrition specialist that can do very similar things.
Mhm.
Because it seems as like in a gym, it's kind of more of an advice kind of situation
Yeah.
versus this is a specific clinical medical diet that's happening for this person's disease state, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know when I, because I deal with nutrition with clients, and I deal more of a consulting type of view where it's not really, um, I don't do like, I'm not into meal plans or anything like that. I'm not into prescribing them anything of in terms of like specific foods to eat for specific things. I'm more about just decision making. And I try to, one of the biggest things for precision nutrition that I liked about the course was they gave us an insight into that difference of basically the lines we have to draw in terms of like
Mm.
what we can do, what you can't do, what might be a blurred line, and like just be careful about in terms of like giving advice to certain people, especially if they have underlying issues. So I think it's important for people because I think now, I think if you're going to go to somebody, I would trust someone with the most education. And right now, there's a lot of that in between going on where there's a lot of nutritionists, there's a lot of people who have a lot of experience with nutrition. I also think nutrition is confused by weight cuts in terms of sport because there's a lot of people who are, nutritionists who are just weight cutters, and they just help people get ready for like shows or competitions or fights, especially in MMA. Or bodybuilding is another big one where they'll pay a coach, X amount of dollars to get them to the stage. And it's not really nutritional advice. It's just them knowing how to like cut weight. And that's, seen as a nutritionist of some kind or a dietitian in some light, especially if you don't know the definition. So I really think it's important to start with that so people understand like the level of education you do have and like the level of I don't know the word I'm looking for, merit, I guess, in terms of
Mm.
like making decisions and making suggestions, and why it's different for you than it is for someone like myself who has a certification in a lesser degree.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think adding just to add to that, like I think what's really important to note too is because we're not all in clinical settings,
yeah,
right? So like if we take that piece away, how do we compare the two as far as like what who can do what and whatnot? Um, it also comes down to insurance too.
yeah,
So when dietitians start to practice, you have this like identification number that says, "Hey, I am operating under this body of not laws, but ethics
mhm,
essentially, and um, I can be taken through some people's insurance. So I can build, let's say you come to me with like nutrition counseling questions. I might go into the system and say, okay, I am doing a 1 hour nutrition counseling session for someone with diabetes. We can send that to that person's insurance and they can try to bill for that. Or if it's something that is out of pocket, then of course they pay out of pocket. When I think on the flip side, nutritionists could still give advice, but there's no backing of insurance covering any of it.
yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
cool, awesome. So hopefully that answers any questions for people, or kind of, I don't know if they had any questions about that, but I kind of wanted to make that. That was one of the biggest things because, like I said, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what is able and what people are capable of doing. So I want to get that out there and kind of push it.
Mhm.
All right, what do you like for you? I know you've just kind of gotten into this as like a profession. So I think that the best of this is yet to come for you. But what do you love like most right now about being in the nutrition field and being a registered dietitian? Because I think, like I said, and I'll let you answer, but I think that for me, um, depending on where you want to take this for the rest of your life, um, there's always going to be that end goal of like helping people. And I think that that's going to come. And I'm curious about like that, along with what else really drives you about like loving this stuff.
Yeah. I would say I love I love food. Like I am a foodie person. and we all eat. And I think I just love the story of food and how it not only affects us like on a biological level, but the community around it, how it grows, its effect on the environment. And so I think when people just hear dietitian or think of someone in nutrition, they think of, okay, what I eat and how it affects my body. When in reality, it's a whole slew of other characteristics that I love. And so I guess standing on the more how does it affect your body side, what I love is knowing that people can fuel themselves to do really amazing things, whether that's like mental or physical, by fueling themselves in a certain way.
Yeah.
The other side I love about it is the social side and like the mental side of it and the emotional side, right? So I love that we surround ourselves with certain kinds of foods at certain times of year, and I love seasonal foods. And I think just connecting all of that, I maybe way down the line, I kind of envision myself working in some sort of, um, I don't even know how to put it into words, like sustainable food systems or like integrative and functional medicine of like, how can we take this person who might be feeling off in some way and help them understand their diet and how that's affecting who they are, how they're acting, where do they get their food, and how does that affect the farmer who is growing it? How does that affect the soil and the economy? And so it seems really complex, and it is,
Yeah.
but I think it's just because honestly, in school, we don't focus on that side of nutrition. It's
Yeah.
pretty clinical, but I just don't see myself in that world, which is why eventually maybe I might just start my own practice, you know?
I think that's the best thing, and like I think that especially for what you're trying to do, not to give you life advice here, but like I think sometimes with stepping into like the clinical field, you oftentimes get if you're working under a different light that's not yourself, you end up having to follow somebody else's guidelines, and you're not able to kind of fully express what it is that you want. And like I even saw that with the gym I owned. I owned a gym for 3 years, and it wasn't by myself. So a lot of times it was guidelines of what somebody else wanted. And for me, there was things that I wanted to do that I knew would bring um, a better experience for the clients or the customers or the people in general. And it just wasn't, you have to listen to someone else. You have to follow someone else's, needs and desires. And it's like if you have an idea of what you think you want to offer, you just got to go for it and like do it. And in terms of like nutrition, I think the biggest thing right now, and I think the biggest uh, hole or gap is just awareness, because I feel, and again, this is just my own personal opinion, but like I feel like another thing like COVID could have been um, very much what's the word I'm like contained if people ate better and were healthier overall and didn't have these underlying conditions that are caused by a regular uh,
Mm,
standard American diet,
yeah.
or just had awareness in general of better you know tactics to keep themselves healthier and like and working out and just eating better cleaner foods, like you said, where they're getting their foods, all this stuff is in terms of disease and problems in America and problems in the world. And you see it in other places where they eat cleaner, they eat better, they eat foods that are coming from different places and not being produced in ways that they are here, and they're healthier, they live longer, they're less stressed. And I think here it's very much a misunderstanding of how much that affects us. And it
Mm,
takes a long time because even if, and this is the tough thing, is like you could eat a shitty diet for a couple months and not feel it until a couple months. If you're very aware of yourself and like you eat clean and then you go into eating like shit food for a while, you're gonna feel it right away. But if you're just a average person who's just eating the normal diet, you're not going to feel that stuff until you like down the line. It might take months, it might take years, it might take getting diagnosed with something or having some disease until you're like, oh shit, this stuff actually matters, because no
yeah.
one actually is like aware, and there's no information out there. It's always just like arguing topics of like, oh, this is right, this is right, now I'm going to do this, now I'm going to do this. And then instead of being like, all right, well, like, what does the average person need? Let's actually teach what the average
Yeah.
person needs. And then once the average person learns that, then that awareness is going to start making, like, it's just about bringing up that bottom line. And the bottom
Yeah.
line doesn't have the information accessible enough, or, they don't know enough to make those decisions. Whereas, like,
Right.
most of this food is just not, it's not up to par with what people need. And
Yeah,
then,
and I think like going off of that, it's so important to know that this is like a life cycle thing,
yeah,
right? Like we reward people with food.
yeah,
Like, hey, you were born today, let's give you a cake. And that's a tradition, like, cool, whatever. But I think just that mindset of the reward being food and starting super young
yeah,
is kind of crazy.
yeah,
But it's so ingrained in us that we don't really care. So I think trying to kind of balance between like the actual in a perfect world dietitian versus the real world dietitian and understanding values and traditions and things like that. To give kids candy and like fruit juice even under the age of 4 is like a huge no.
it's
Is
like
like,
giving someone heroin. It's the same thing. Like, it's just,
right.
you become
Oh
addicted.
my God. Yeah, and so like, when kids go to grandma's house, oh, they're just here, have them, they can eat whatever they want, but what we don't realize is that that's laying the foundation of them having this baseline of what sugar is
Yeah,
throughout their whole life,
yeah,
and that food is just taste, and that it doesn't have this bigger picture around it. So that's kind of the more strict dietitian version of that. But on the other side, like, yeah, maybe occasionally we're not just going to not have birthday cake. Like,
yeah.
we're all going to have birthday cake for the rest of our lives.
Mhm.
Let's be real. But at the same time, like, we need to find a balance between knowing that story of our food and then integrating that into like normal traditions and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's also the misunderstanding of food because it's so, um, readily available. And I did another podcast yesterday with a guy who I look up to in terms of like fitness and whatnot. His name's Killian Hamilton, and we were just talking about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and kind of just like talking about that in general, and how, like, in terms of life, you know, shelter, food and water, and then just like the basic necessities are at the bottom. But like, it's been so, I guess westernized in terms of like the simplicity of having those always. There's no one's ever going to wake up in the morning and question like, oh, where am I going to live tonight? What am I going to eat? And there are people who obviously who question that, but like for the majority of Americans and majority of people in the world, they wake up, they have a place that they're staying, they have food that they're eating. And it's moved up to this next section of like what's actually important, or what do I actually need, or what do I need to actually stress about. And in terms of like, no one's getting their own food. They're going to the market, they're just picking it up, and then they're going home and they're cooking it. And then there's like that miss there's a gap between like actually, you know, producing the food and then getting the food that the average person isn't seeing. So it's very uh, not connected. It's unconnected in the ways from that big gap right there. And I think it changes how a lot of people eat, or how a lot of people look at nutrition, and how they deal with nutrition, because it's not something, like I said, it's not something they ever have to think about. It's like, I need food, I'm going to go to the market. Whereas, like, a long time ago, it's like, I need food. It's like, I don't, if I don't find it, like, that's it, I'm not eating. Or it's like,
Right.
now it's like only the wealthy have this type of food, or only this type of person has this type of food. Now it's accessible, and there's like a misunderstanding of the actual need of the food. And when people
Yeah.
start to actually, dive into, what do I actually need for food? How do I, prepare it? How do I cook it? How do I, and the sugar thing is like, that's a thing in of itself, where like sugar has become like this, it's introduced so young in our population that it's crazy. Because, and there's videos of it online for the first time, like for my baby having sugar for the first time, and you see, and it's just like that is,
Like it's a good reaction video, but
yeah,
you're like,
exactly. But like, you just created an addiction for your child, like, you know what I mean? And like, you don't and it's not like you said, there's going to be birthday cake, you know there's sugar that's going to happen in your life. You're going to eat sugar, you're going to eat cake. There's some cookies that you just can't say no to. Your grandma makes cookies for you, you're not going to say no, just like me.
right.
But like, they're just, in my eyes, if people understood, the dangers of what that stuff does long term, they would be more cautious and there would be better options to replace that. I think it's just a misunderstanding. And like I said, the body has such a strong bias towards adaptation and that it'll adjust to whatever you're eating. But eventually it's going to lead to sickness, or it's going to lead to health problems, or it's going to lead to energy fatigue, or, problems other places in your life. And you're not going to realize it until you're like, oh, it's because I'm eating sugar every single day. I'm slamming 4 coffees a day. I'm drinking, I'm eating uh, processed foods from the moment I wake up to the second I go to bed. And, I can't lose weight. My hormones are inbound. I can't have sex. I'm tired all the time. I'm moody all the time, and no one realizes it. And they're just like, "Oh, I don't know what's up." And they're like, "Here's medication. Here's medication. Here's
Right,
medication."
right. Oh my God, right.
Yeah.
It's like, and I think that is such a good point, because by like most people's standards, food is just something that tastes good and like fills your belly.
Yep.
So, and it brings you comfort. Just like we were talking about with sugar, it lights up this, when you consume sugar, it lights up the same part of your brain as like cocaine.
Yeah.
So if that says anything, so if
There's-
someone is in that, yeah, like if someone is in that, maybe they're like at this point 45, they have type 2 diabetes and just are having this slew of issues, and they're like, oh, I'm just going to take some meds. It's like, it's such a hard thing, because we sometimes don't know that it's the food, because yeah, sweets have sugar obviously, but there are things like salad dressing that have sugar that we don't realize that do.
Yep.
I think this is overall just like a larger problem, like you were saying, the hierarchy of needs. And so again, food being for most people, like it fills me up, I don't feel that hunger kind of empty feeling, and it tastes pretty good to me. That is like a really, really large problem, because it's leading to nutrient deficiencies.
Yep.
So
And
there was
I mean, that's
this,
something that you specifically can speak on, because obviously that's another part of being a dietitian that's huge, is that, um, you know, I know that that's a main focus for a lot of dietitians, is like the actual, and I've talked to Jerry a couple times and he's told me that like your kind of focus is micronutrients and not so much, macronutrients. And micronutrients are really those things that build up everything else. And when you start looking at, I can't like, and this is something I'm interested in, that when I'm more set and like I have the money to do it, I want to go look at this, is you know a, a set in terms of like micronutrient tests. And I think that can be done by blood work. And you can just like a blood panel and kind of see all that stuff, because you know there are things that we need as humans, and seeing, and they're missing in like a standard American diet or the Western diet, whatever you want to call it. And without them, you're going to have these common themes of problems in terms of energy and performance and other aspects of life. So understanding that and seeing that is something that I think is crucial for people to actually talk about, because again, it's only broken down now into those macros, which are protein, carbs, fat, and then it's like just take a multivitamin, and half of these multivitamins that are put together, they don't work, because there's vitamins that are with other vitamins that cancel out each other or just not soluble in certain situations. And like they're just like, oh, here's this one fix it all pill, woman's
Mhm.
one a day, take it and you're good. And it's like, no, because like, vitamin D doesn't soluble, it's not soluble with other vitamins, and like other vitamins don't mix well. Like it's just, and you end up just trying to put a band-aid over the situation instead of just like actually taking a step back and being like, hey, what can I actually do here to fix my diet? And like if you have the means, learn, like go and learn, like take the time to learn about it, take the time to actually understand, or talk to someone like, a registered dietitian or someone who's out there that you can actually have that conversation with, because it's just that important down the line. And like,
Right.
it's that awareness that's going to actually fix these problems, but it's being avoided now because I don't know why it's being avoided. I don't know why no one's talking about nutrition being a help in making sure that this pandemic doesn't happen again. We're already in it. We're getting through it. It's like getting through the end of this is the goal right now, but making sure this doesn't happen again, it will. But how do we make sure that our people are safer and smarter and healthier longer term?
Right.
I kind of went on off track there, but we can get back to what I was asking. Is just kind of like, you know, that whole thing is just, it's frustrating because people like yourself need like oftentimes have such a bigger voice than are given. And it's all, a doctor is a doctor, and that's fine. But someone and I really think this is going to start to come to light, is that nutritionists and people who are in the trenches every day, kind of learning about this stuff and actually putting their hand in the pot and being like, all right, what's in here, are going to start to really be respected more, because this is what's going to, and like I said, this is what's going to help. And like understanding those diseases is fine, but being able to actually implement change seems to be that missing link besides medication. And medication is great. Like it's why we're all living past 30 and able to do all these things right now. But in terms of actually setting our
prevention, pretty much,
like
right?
yeah, who take this shit seriously, like I take working out seriously, and you go down the line of like, all right, this is what needs to happen, not eat whatever you want, and then in 30 years I'll give you a medication because that's easier. um, and yeah, I mean, it's tough, and it's got to be tough for someone like yourself, I can imagine, because talking
Yeah,
about that is probably hard with most people.
it is. And like, I think you bring up a good point of like, hopefully we meaning dietitians will be able to have more of a voice. And I think that's why the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is requiring the masters.
Yeah.
Because when we're in a hospital setting and we're the only one with a bachelor's degree, but everybody else is like doctorates and stuff, then people won't really take us seriously. But just kind of a couple other points that I think are really important to bring up is like the macro and micronutrient thing. Macronutrients just provide energy. Micronutrients do not. So just a side note,
Yeah.
when you ever take like, I don't know, if you have a what would you call it? Like an energy drink with like all these B vitamins and stuff like that. And it's like, B vitamins give you energy. That is false.
Yeah.
B vitamins essentially allow you to create energy because they are needed in the pathways to produce energy, right?
Yeah.
So people are like consuming these things and then assuming, oh, I'm going to have so much energy.
Assuming is an understatement.
Right. Because hello. Just because, I can't blame people for like trusting a label.
Yeah.
Because that's what they see, and they assume that there's this larger body that's like taking care of it and regulating it. And sometimes you see that little like cross, and then you read on the back and it's like not evaluated by the FDA. And I'm like, whoa. And then I just kind of wanted to bring up the other point about like, oh my gosh, I totally lost my train of thought. Oh yes, okay. So I wanted to bring up the point about macros again, in that I read this study and it blew my mind. This was a little less than a year ago. There was a guy named Dr. Ziska, and he did research on the nutrient content of rice. I think it was like 18 strands of rice across China or something like this. And, in China, this is a large piece of their diet is rice. Yeah. And so what he did was expose these different rices to different amounts of carbon dioxide and allowed them to grow, and then analyze the nutrient content. What he found that with higher amounts of carbon in the air, the more carbohydrate there was and less micronutrient content.
And the rice.
So, right. So what does this mean? The amount of carbon in our atmosphere as a world is getting higher. So we're going to continue to grow grains like rice, assuming that the nutrient content is the same. So, on all of our labels in the US and worldwide, we say 1 cup of rice provides X amount of carbs, X amount of this, when in reality that is changing. But I don't think that's the consumer's like responsibility to know, right? That is our responsibility as dietitians to translate that, but also as these larger bodies to say, holy cow, I can't believe this is happening, but it is, and we need to communicate this properly, because as people continue to eat this rice, let's say in China, with more carbohydrate, that can lead them to nutrient deficiencies, right? They're just going to have more carbs, but in reality, they're not getting the B vitamins that are coming with rice. And so we see an increase in diseases associated with like that. So maybe like diabetes and things like that, but we also see obesity.
Yeah.
So it's this holistic problem that is honestly so complex that I think when your everyday consumer thinks of it, they stop. They just
Yeah.
turn it off.
And it's
Like
abundant.
just
It's abundance too, and it's the same thing. It's that, like specifically, and I've always seen this with like my family, my grandparents, is like when they were in Italy, my grandpa was like, he'd eat once a day maybe, and it would be like a bowl of pasta,
crazy.
and it was a bowl of pasta and some fruit and like whatever, and like yeah, that worked there because he was moving all day and running around and doing whatever and working, and then his one meal was pasta, and like yeah, you could eat that. Then what happened is a lot of those people, a lot of the people from overseas who were poor, didn't have anything, came over here, started working, started making money, and started having food. They were like, pasta's it every single meal. And then you saw that spike from um, when, all the other stuff that needs to be fixed in nutrition, like BMI, and when that was a thing in like this, whenever, the 60s, I think. And like people were like this because, they weren't eating they were eating a different type of way. And then they started eating more carbs because that looked like, then there was a war on fat, and then there was a war on, saying that fat was bad for you, and then there was just eat carbs, and then people just started eating carbs, and then they were overeating carbs, and then it was just like this bad cycle of just like people eating more and doing less, and like and then you saw this what is now this obesity problem we have, is that people are consuming more because foods are becoming more and more and more and more calorie dense, and we're doing less and less and less and less, and then we're dealing with these problems that we see on a day-to-day basis. And like for me it's just like telling giving people the understanding, especially and that's why we're in this thing now, and it's going to be hard, but it's going to be fixed, is because there's people in our generation who are actually like looking for the answers, whereas like the people in the last generation were being told the answers by people who had no idea or were from a totally different world. And like again, it was just it's more of an activity thing, but like they were from a point where their one meal a day was pasta and lard, and like I hear how my grandpa used to eat. I'm just like, yeah, like that would work back then, but it wouldn't work now because you don't move as much. And then like you talk about it today, like their kids grew up with that information, and then that information is passed down to us, and that's why there's cake at every meal. There's high carb, like very high processed carb diets, or highly processed meats and things like that are very easy to consume, but they're there because those are what is cheap, easy to make. You don't have to have much cooking skills to do that, and it's a problem that needs to be solved.
You know what's kind of interesting? I think it was on like an NPR podcast,
Mhm.
but it was found that I think last year there is a apparently there is like a known thing that millennials and Gen Z do not own can openers. Like so
I don't have
random.
a can opener. I actually
Like
don't.
right, right. Like it's so random. But if you think about it, it's like we don't open canned goods,
Yeah,
or we like look at the
I was
people
gonna say, oh,
count.
they have that little thing on there. Yeah, no.
Right. So that's just kind of funny. But I think it's important to kind of bring up the topic. And I know that it is a touchy subject of like body image too.
Yeah,
So I think although we are becoming more aware of how food affects our weight and how food affects our mood and all of this kind of stuff, we are starting to see a generation now that is becoming more accepted with body image,
yeah,
which is so important because body image is associated with like eating disorders a lot of the time, and binge eating, and just like a lot of stuff. And I love that we're able to kind of embrace who we are and be confident with who we are. And I think what's really tricky right now is that it seems like it's a two-sided argument of like, hey, my best friend or my sister or my brother is extremely overweight and they love who they are, so they're going to eat whatever they want.
yeah,
Versus, that's fine, but we can't confuse identity with health,
yeah,
right? Like if someone is overweight and obese, but their metabolic panel's fine, they live in a great life, they have no pain, like who cares? Like
yeah,
you do you. But if someone is in pain, they have cholesterol going through the roof, they're having trouble breathing and just moving, but
yeah,
they're like, hey, this is who I am. Ultimately, that's their decision to
yeah,
to take hold of their health. But it's so tricky because we're taking identity and saying, oh, this person, i.e. doctor, dietitian, wants me to lose weight. They don't get me, they don't
yeah,
understand me. When in reality, it's taking what that client or that patient said of you're in pain, so on and so on. And I'm just here to help facilitate that, but ultimately it's what they want to do for themselves.
Natural selection.
Oh, geez.
That's because, yeah, I mean, whatever. I mean, like, you're right though, but like some people just don't listen, and some people they confuse it. And like in terms of, yeah, obviously you want everybody to love themselves, and that's the key. But it's like at some point you got to also be real with yourself. It's like, loving yourself and not being healthy are two different things. And like
I
you
guess,
can,
yeah, it's like, what's their priority,
yeah, and that's the toughest part is priorities, and that's why it's such a big thing for me. Like when I talk to somebody in terms of fitness, when I work with somebody, that's one of the biggest sections I have in my questions is their priorities and trying to figure out
Mm,
like what do they care about? Like what is really what do they care about right now in their life? What are they trying to do? Is it their kids? Is it their job? Is it making money? Is it um, finding happy? Like whatever it is, like how do I make sure that I can give you enough stuff that fits within your priorities? Because if you don't, you know, uh, it's not going to work. And I think a lot of the maybe problem is today is that people are in this space of um, feeling like they're being attacked when it's just someone trying to help in terms of like giving them information to just be better. And like, and again, this is like you don't have to help anyone. Like you have all this information, you could just keep it to yourself and not have any help anybody, but like you're choosing to, and it's just information that is out there and accessible, but you're just trying to make it more digestible for people. And that's what I try to do. Is like I try
was
to
that
make
a
it
pun?
what
Was that pun intended?
it was not intended, but yeah, that was a pun. Um but yeah, so it's just like making it easier for them to just get. And like there's a lot of shit out there. And like if you go through it fitness and nutrition wise, you could read for days, and each hour you could have your opinion changed on either direction depending on what you're reading. And like for us, it's about developing what works best for most people. And you know, that in that you're helping people reach their best version of themselves. And people also, and this is another thing is people also in fitness in the fitness world they misconstrue the term function, and in nutrition world they also misconstrue the word function. And people look at function in the fitness world as like all this fancy handstand stuff and overhead squats and things that are like really hard, and function is what you do when you're walking and breathing. Like that's the body's function, is to walk and breathe, a bipedal animal, to walk and breathe. And once you start looking at it like that, then it's like, all right, function of the body for nutrition, like what is it? The function of the body is to, of nutritionally is to make sure all those things work and we're getting all the things that we need in the body, not, bulking and cutting and being like these powerhouse jacked people or like these skinny, thin, like supermodel type people. Like it's not like the function of the food is to create a environment in which our body can, you know, help us function physically. And people oftentimes, because of how it is in the past and how other countries and places have made it more of a um, like a ritualistic type thing where it's like you eat dinner and you eat this type of food at this type of time. Like I used to be that way too, and I was like, oh, I can't eat eggs at night. It's eggs, and it's like no, well, like I eat beef in the morning now. I eat like food in the morning that like I necessarily would never have eaten because I was like, oh, you can't eat that in the morning, and it's like it's food.
Mm.
You just eat it when you eat it, and like and there's all this idea that like you have to eat certain foods at certain times, and if you're eating a certain food, you're a part of a certain group of people, and you're not, and then you're against a certain group of people if you eat a certain food, and it's just kind of confusing to everybody, and it turns people off. And then they just go to the easiest thing, which is a canned food, white bread, like all these different options that are cheaper, and it's just like, all right, I'm gonna die anyway, so what's the point? And it's like this is the
Yeah.
point. It's like making yourself
Yeah.
feel better is the point, and not having like just taking that short time of learning the basics or having that information more handy, readily available, and then just figuring it out yourself, but then like doing better because of it.
Well, yeah, I think like it's so important to know that yes, food does have that scientific biological reason behind it, right?
Yeah,
It's for our body to function this or that way. But the, I guess, more soft skills around it is that we do have to acknowledge that it's cultural. We do have
Yeah.
to acknowledge that it's memories and it's nostalgia and it's emotional and it's tradition. And so I think what's so important, I guess, going back to like body image in what you said is what is important for the person you're working with.
Mhm.
Because if it's a totally different conversation if I come in as the food police and I say, hey, I notice you are obese class 2, you need to cut out this, this, and this because your
Yeah.
cholesterol is high and this is what will help. I in my own mind can think and know that that is technically going to help. But if I were to say, like, why are we meeting today, and that person were to say, my doctor told me to come in, and we dig a little deeper, and they're like, I love food, but I don't see how that connects with my health, and like I have some pain in my knees, but like I don't really see how that connects. Okay, well, instead of focusing on the specifics of cholesterol and all this, let's continue to focus on that person's knee health, talking about food in a way of, how can we see the connection of the quantity and of what we're eating, and how is that going to affect how you're feeling? Well, then that person is way more likely to stick around and feel motivated than if I were to come and feel like I'm almost like attacking them and being that food police.
And I think it can come off as that way early on, especially in like our field, because there's usually when someone reaches that point that they're reaching out, they've got more problems than they're capable of handling. And then us coming in is like, all right, well, yeah, you could probably fix this, this, and this, and this. And they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. It's overwhelming and it's too much. And it's like, all right, well, like as a coach and as a dietitian and as someone who like is going to start dealing with people, the thing that I found best is just what's most important at that time. Try to fix it and not even like fix it right away. Just start to implement small changes, and that's what
Yeah.
people have to do. The problem is again, people will go to a dietitian. They'll say, "Oh, I need to fix all this shit." They're like, "All right, I'm going to fix it tomorrow. I'm going to go to the market. I'm not going to eat this. I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to eat that." And we're going to do it. Day one works. Day two, someone steps on their foot. Someone hits their car and pisses them off. They go home. They eat a jar of ice cream, and then they're like, "I'll try again next year."
Wait, a
And it's like,
jar of ice cream?
or whatever, a container of ice cream.
It's
Like,
like, what do they got down there in Nashville in
no,
ice
I
cream
don't know.
jars?
I don't know what they have. I haven't touched ice cream, but it's like it's that where they get overwhelmed, and it's this overwhelming feeling that causes them to fall off and then not do it. And
Yeah.
it's our job because for me, if I come across somebody that I work with, like I work at a gym now, and there's some stuff that I don't 100% agree with, but like it's my job to at least give my opinion. It makes me feel better if I at least give my opinion and give them the information that I think is right. If they make the decision otherwise, that's on them. And like that's fine. As long as it's an informed decision. And I know that like I didn't just let someone go off into the deep end by themselves and then without the right knowledge, then like yeah, if they want to eat Oreos every night and that's fine and they don't really care about, their quality of life in 10 years, and like that's, up to them. But like as long as I'm giving the information, as long as you're giving the information and you're putting it out there in a way that's not attacking anybody, but like you're wrong for doing that, you have to do this. It's like, listen, this is my personal opinion. This is what I've seen. This is research I've done. This is what seems to work. Try it, or implement it in some way. If it works, it works. If not, we tried and like
Yeah.
we can try something else so we can go from there.
I
um
guess to just kind of add to that, and I think it's surprising for a lot of people to know, I guess just to like continue this part of the conversation here is like, from my understanding, dietitians are the only people in the health field that have to take courses on how to talk about the problem at hand. We
and,
have to take nutrition
and,
counseling.
and this is my,
So
yeah, go ahead, sorry, but
yeah, so like I think it's one thing to have the knowledge, but our senior year, you have to take nutrition counseling. And honestly, it's one of the most valuable courses because it talks about motivation and all of this. And I'll just use this as an example. I was talking with someone recently about emotional eating, and they said, hey, like every time I'm in a bad mood, I'm just gonna go to the freezer, grab ice cream, and just eat. I don't really care. But then after I feel bad.
yeah,
So I'm coming to you because I want help with stopping this habit. And so I said, I could tell you to not go buy this junk, quote, junk food. Um, we might eventually get to that point, but why do you feel this way? Why do you want to? And then what we kind of discovered was this person decided, okay, well, if I were to make a small goal for myself, I'm not going to drink as much coffee during the day because
Yeah.
I know that's not good for me. I'll drink more water. And I was like, okay, well, why are you drinking coffee? And they said, well, I'm so exhausted all the time. I don't really have help around the house at this point. Um, and I am up really late and all of that. So I was like, okay, well, if you were to truly drink less coffee, are you going to feel more awake during the day to get the stuff that you need done? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, okay, well, right again, at this point, this emotional eating and staying up late and drinking coffee and all this kind of stuff, like it seems like it's a lot, but let's start with maybe in the moment when you're emotionally eating, what is something that can we can do for you to kind of bring back the moment or kind of come back into your mind. And they're like, okay, well, maybe I can have a journal. I'm like, oh, what would you do with that journal? While I'm eating, I'm not going to have any distractions of my phone or the TV. As I'm eating,
Yeah.
I will write down what I'm feeling.
Yep.
And so initially, tying this all back, the person came in strong, came in hot of, I want to stop with this junk food. I'm going to start with coffee because it doesn't make me feel good. And in reality, it's bringing the mindfulness to their eating habits. And ultimately, they were the one that said, I am okay with this goal and I'm going to create this goal for myself. It wasn't me. I was just coaching them along.
Yeah, I think for me personally, one of the biggest breakthroughs I had as a coach and like a person in terms of fitness, wasn't fitness. It was actually learning how to talk to people and deal with people and understand people and how to communicate properly because, you know, I have all the information I think necessary for me to, at this point in my life, be a good coach. I want to be a better coach, so I'm always going to learn more. But being able, and like I said, being able to make that information digestible, pun intended that time,
Yes.
and put in a way that makes sense for that person and dealing with those emotional problems. I'm not the same as you. You might tell me something and I might take it a completely different way that you're going to take it. I might say something and you might take it a different way and I have the intention of something else, but I can't change the way that you think about something. I have to understand why you're thinking about it in that way and then deal with it as I talk to you. The biggest thing for me, listening to diving deeper into psychology, diving deeper into negotiation, diving deeper into like just talking to people really set me 10 steps forward in terms of like conveying information and having that problem because I get that all the time as I get people who come in and they're like, all right, I'm dealing with uh, this in my life and like I'm not happy where I'm at. I'm like, all right, well, like I said, what's going on? Like, what are your priorities right now? What are your values right now? What is your nutritional behavior? How are you feeling? And it's not like, oh, you're not working out enough because, usually working out is the last thing on my mind when I'm talking to somebody. I'm trying to figure out what are these other pieces that they're dealing with because they have so much more to do than like that one workout you're going to do that day. Yeah, the working out is going to help, but like overall, all this stuff that you just talked about and all the stuff that is involved with emotional eating and dealing with why someone actually goes to grab ice cream and why people drink coffee and why people, it's just like dealing with that takes a lot more than just saying like, oh, stop eating it. It's like, all right, well then I'll just start eating something else because it's no an addictive an addiction isn't going to just like go away unless you actually deal with like that baseline understanding of why you have it. Otherwise, it's gonna be like, yeah, I'm not addicted to coffee or ice cream anymore, but now I'm chugging 4 Red Bulls a day because I need something like that. And then you start dealing with it in some way, and you don't actually deal with the problem, and then you start just running yourself in a circle where you don't get anything solved.
Right.
And this is going to be one of my questions. Is kind of like, what was some of your biggest like pet peeves in the nutrition world? Because I'm not deeply involved in it, and I have some pet peeves. And like, I can imagine being someone who's very like very much immersed in it and is always, and has been on both sides. Like, I don't know how often you or how long you ate meat. I know you said since you were 13. I don't know if that was like when you were 13, you were a vegan from then on. Is that like you didn't eat anything else?
No, I've like fluctuated from being vegetarian to vegan to pescatarian. So
Okay,
yeah.
so so you have some experiences with everything, but like, I kind of want to talk about your transition from a Western diet to being a vegetarian. I know you talked about it at the beginning, but like maybe a little bit more detail on that, and then kind of some of your biggest pet peeves within the industry in terms of talking about that stuff. Because I know, for example, Um, I'm all about learning in terms of like helping people better. The way I eat is different from other people, and it might not agree with some people. And like this, the way that you eat is different too. And like I've always been interested in learning about it. It's just about people who, and I think it's important for the people who do make that decision to eat vegetarian to just make sure that they're doing it in the right way and making sure that they're getting everything they need from it. And like I think that, in my opinion, with it is that like it can be done. It's just very hard for someone who's uninformed and then doesn't have the I don't want to say funds because it's not something you have to be like rich to do, but like you want to make sure that you're getting everything, because it's not just, and I'm sure you can attest to this, it's not just eating vegetables. It's not that's the only thing you're eating. It's just like, I just sit there and I eat raw broccoli all day, or I eat raw carrots all day. It's adding other things in like fats. It's adding other things in where you're getting protein. It's adding other, and it's not like you're adding all these crazy things in, but it's just like understanding what it is exactly that you're eating and making that transition. Because I know you helped Jerry, and Jerry was someone who ate meat for basically his whole life and was in an Italian style household who wasn't probably the most balanced nutrition in terms of like eating on a regular basis. So you can dive in that a little bit and just kind of go from there.
Sure. So I think just overall, you mentioned that being on a vegetarian diet, it's important to do it correctly. Like
Yeah,
when I say correctly, I mean healthfully and
yeah.
wholesomely. And I think that goes for any kind of diet too, right?
No,
Like
definitely, definitely, definitely.
you can be an omnivore and have the standard American diet, and
Yep.
you can be in triathlons, right?
Right.
But it's just a matter of having that education and being confident in the actual science of these diets, to make sure that you're doing well. So I would say my transition, like I said, it was pretty stark.
Mhm.
Like, I'm going to be vegan, and then I didn't know what I was getting into. But I guess adding to one of your first questions of why I wanted to go into nutrition, I knew that I wasn't eating properly.
Mhm.
My family grew up pretty poor. I kind of
Mhm.
like grew up in the projects. And so we didn't have a lot of food ever. We had like one big shopping day, which was when we had food stamps. And, so I would just eat like peanut butter and jelly, or, oranges and things like
Mhm.
that. And I remember being like a middle teenager, and I tweeted, which, why am I on this social media so young?
I mean,
MySpace and
Twitter,
Twitter, are
Twitter.
you
I mean,
kidding?
what? That's Twitter was. I remember I was like one of the first ones in my high school on Twitter. Uh,
Dude.
MySpace, I didn't have. I remember you were talking about MySpace. I didn't have MySpace, but Twitter, I was like one of the first ones in my high school on Twitter. So I wouldn't put that out there. That's just normal for our age.
Yeah, I tweeted like, if all I could eat every day was yogurt, oranges, and drink green tea, I would be satisfied. And I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding? So I guess transitioning from like not only the standard American diet or the like a traditional Western diet into vegetarianism, it was quick, but transitioning from that nutrient poor vegetarian diet into something more holistic, once I was able to have the means and the education to do so, was really important
Yeah.
too. So then you asked a question about pet peeves. I would say let's kind of split it into two. One of them is like in the dietitian realm, and then dietitian versus clients and just your everyday
Yeah.
people. I would say in the dietitian world, the use of vitamins and supplements,
Mhm.
we really don't learn a ton about them in our education, but what we do know is that they're not regulated. There are third parties out there that can like verify some, but again, it's no governing body that says, yes, this has this much in it.
The
So you can
supplements are
get fish.
scary. They get scary depending on where they come from.
Yeah.
And like, there's people in
So go
athletes who
ahead.
take that stuff, and then they pop for steroids, or they pop for PEDs, or they pop, and it's like it's dirty. But sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Yeah. So I mean, like what we do know, we meaning RDs and RDNs, is that vitamins are like your supplement, your little pill of a vitamin is not as bioavailable. Like you said earlier, it can have interactions with other drugs or other nutrients that could be within that vitamin, i.e., a multivitamin. And we, in a lot of vulnerable populations, we prescribe them and we say, hey, this is good for you. But we know at our core they're not regulated, and often they're really costly too.
Yeah.
So
I've spent
we're we're going against our own
$300+.
knowledge.
Yeah.
What was
I'm
that?
sure, I said, I'm sure not only just me, but like even, people like that I know that you can go into a supplement store and spend 200-300 bucks on just like a stack for something. And like, and you're getting everything that you quote unquote need, but like, digestion of that product is a totally different story on the other end. And like, and you can keep going, but like, that's, they do get extremely expensive for stuff that's like, it might be good, you know? And
Right.
sometimes, a lot of times with like fish oils, like, that's why finding proper, um, like whole, like legit forms of like fats. Because like fish oils can be like rancid, like they can be bad when they're in the pill form, and like getting a cheaper version can be very not very good. And it's just like these companies are just mass producing them to push them, and like you might not even be getting like the best version of what it is, and you're paying for the best version of what it is.
Right. Yeah. There even was someone that I knew who was a dietetic intern.
Mhm.
And when they would get sick, they would take Airborne, which, just to listeners out there, Airborne has like an incredible amount of vitamin C. And if you have heard anything about vitamin C, it's good for your immune system.
Yeah.
But the the practice is, oh, I'm feeling sick, let me take Airborne.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just flood my body with vitamin C, when in reality, most dietitians call it really expensive pee, because vitamin C is a water soluble vitamin. So your body only takes up as much as it can with the amount of receptors that it can, and then you pee the rest out.
Yeah.
So how is it that someone who is in dietetics goes to take Airborne even though they know it's not going to work? I think it's really just because, same thing with the vulnerable populations. We're just like, hey, it doesn't hurt to try.
Yeah.
But I think it does eventually hurt to try, because one, it could be expensive, just like we said, over time. But two, we're like invalidating our credentials and our knowledge by suggesting these things, even though we know it's not right.
Yeah.
So that's like RD and RD. But I would say RD versus client is a kind of a different story. Have you seen the documentary called The Social Dilemma?
No, I've heard this like 6 times. I gotta watch it. I gotta watch it this week because I've literally, you're like the fifth or sixth person I've heard talk about it. So
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So it's crazy. I don't even know how else to describe it. But one theme is that social media and the internet have become so finely tuned to what we like and what we pay attention to, that our feed pretty much can't be replicated to anybody else. So for example, for me on my Instagram, it's like zero waste, sustainability, cooking, dance, random things like that. And although I might have my best friend or an identical twin who likes just the same things, it's going to be different.
yeah.
And so why I bring this up is because it has real world effects. And they talk about that in the documentary. And so I think when it comes to food and nutrition and dietitian and clients, if people want to see something and they like one post, it's going to change their feed slowly but surely.
Yeah.
When it changes their feed, it changes their mind.
Yeah.
And it is so hard to tell now what is quackery and what is real. And I feel like sometimes I am going off of this scientific background that I have, looking at research articles from research bodies. And although I know that it's true, if it's not appealing to someone or it doesn't end up in their feed, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like we have studied over and over again that the Mediterranean diet, time and time again, is like the most effective diet on people's cardiovascular health, longevity, all of that. But someone might say, oh, no, it's not. Like I've looked and no, it's not, because have you seen this article? And it's like, it's because they don't want to see it. And so now their feed and everything around them is changing, that it's so hard to be someone in the science field to say, listen, that really is not the case. This is the case. And they're like, no, it's
And
not.
it's flooded, and it's not only that, it's people who look a certain way are peddling, and like it's hard to disagree with someone who looks a certain way. And like it's hard to be like, when you look at someone who's like, oh, they have my dream body. I want to be in that bikini, or I want to be in that tank top. I want to be in that, in that gym looking like brolic like him. And like whatever he says, I'm probably going to listen to him because what does he know? He knows, what do I know that he doesn't? It's like,
Mm.
he's going to know way more than me, and he's probably going to tell me something that's going to help me. And like, you see it, and then like, it, it's hard to say no to that. And you're right. And it's like, it's hard when, the dude who's looking, and this is my thing too, is like athletes talk a lot about this stuff, and athletes talk about supplementation. They talk about, diet, and they talk about performance. And it's like, they are so one off. Like LeBron, realistically, LeBron could eat, you know, not as good as he fuels himself to, a degree that nobody else does because he's got the money, he's got the funds, he's got the time to do it. If LeBron wouldn't be that much different if he didn't eat as clean. Maybe he would have gotten hurt a couple times in his life, but like he is a one off. He is a superhuman. He is a just someone who isn't of a normal body. And like the average person, you can't make those mistakes. Like you can't leave these things out. You can't not talk about certain things, and you can't not have certain things in your diet. And like when you start listening to the wrong things, or you start listening to the wrong people, or you start looking at them in terms of like, their information and their, the way they look is really hard to say no to. And some people look a certain way and they're peddling one thing, or they're peddling another thing, or they're peddling, it's just like those people, unfortunately, are going to get, like a child early on with sugar, are going to get fed something, and they're going to be like, all right, I like this guy. Oh, he looks cool. Oh, I think she's hot. I'm going to listen to her. I think he's hot. I'm going to listen to him. And it's like, then it's just like they just listen to it, and they just listen instead of being like, all right, well, like, yeah, that might be right to some degree, but like, he could also just, have gotten, it could work for him, it could not work for me. And like, it's just this, it's hard for the average person to sit down and say what is real, what is fake, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. And especially when people look a certain way, and it's hard. And you're right. And like, I definitely have to watch that video because I've heard, or the documentary, because I've heard a lot about it and I've seen a lot about it, and I just haven't actually sat down to watch it. But it's, and that's how it goes, and that's how social media is going to start changing. You're right, and changing the way that people see things, because if they don't want to see it, they're not going to see it. And like, and this is going to start turning people, and this is why I believe there's such a divide moving forward now about so many things, is because you know people are unintentionally being pushed to the extremes. Like they're unintentionally being pushed to be far over here or far over here, or extremists on this side or extremists on that side. And it's not even intentional. Like, I don't think it's intentional. I don't think it's ever been intentional. I think what's happening is people are just seeing, like you said, more and more and more and more information that's just validating their semi-right opinion, and it's turning it into a cold hard fact for them. And then they're coming against somebody else who doesn't have that same opinion, and then it's just this.
And you will totally see that in the documentary too, because that's exactly what they talk about. And I don't think it's like, yes, it's, you are able to kind of tailor your feed obviously to what you want it to be like, but I don't think it's the fault of the consumer of the media or the social media, because it's the algorithms that are allowing these to slightly shift. And then you look a week later and it's a completely different feed than when you first opened your Instagram account. So I think there's so much information out there that is true science information. And then people start to kind of open their minds sometimes to it. And there's a scene that you'll notice in The Social Dilemma. There's this in the very beginning, I'm no spoilers, but in the beginning, there's this scene of this guy who works for Google and he knows something is wrong. And so he proposes this idea and everybody starts reading it. And it's this like animated scene, and like everybody's starting to kind of talk and think about it. And then the narrator and the guy from Google was like, and then nothing happened. And what people do is they're like, the cartoons are like looking around and they're talking about it, and then they stop, and then they just look back down at their phone. And so it's like, oh, it worked for a little, but it actually didn't get anywhere because people just went right back to their thing. So I think when it comes to dietitians and clients, or just kind of the general population, it's like we just need to continue to try to say, hey, these are our credentials, this is what we do, this is the science, and let's acknowledge what's on your feed, and let's also acknowledge what is truly scientific.
And I have a couple more questions because these are kind of moving in towards this direction, but um, I'll ask this one first. What are some of your favorite sources of information like regarding nutrition and kind of like where do you turn? Because for me, I turn to a lot of, precision nutrition stuff because I like it. OPEX, the other certification I have, gives a lot of like very good basic information that's easy to give to people. What do you look at as a dietitian, or what are some things that you can suggest that what people who listen to this can go today and kind of look to form their own opinion, or look to kind of enforce whatever it is that they believe now?
Yeah, so I'll give you like one and a half
Yeah.
answers. So, this is the half. Normally, we'll have people go to the governing bodies like the USDA's website, My Plate. It used to be like the food pyramid.
Mhm.
If they have a specific disease state, like going to the American Diabetes Association or American Heart Association or something like that. But I say that reluctantly because there is so many politics that go on behind the scenes of what dictates those things. So yes, we can trust them, but I say that kind of reluctantly because there is a lot of like industry influence and stuff like that on those. I'll
Yeah.
leave that there. So yes, the USDA has some good resources. For what they're worth, they're not going to harm you. I think when you look at it from like a very, very, very high level, but when you zoom on in, there are some things that you're like, do we really need that much dairy in a day? Again, something that's not going to really harm you. So
Yeah.
USDA website. But my favorite is something called the Center for Science in the Public Interest, CSPI.
Yes.
This is an organization that
Dot
I
com
think
or
is
dot org?
based. What was that?
.org or .com?
So it's CSPI.org, I think.
.org. Okay.
I'll double check. Um, but this is an organization, I think, based out of DC, and they are called like the watchdogs of the nutrition world, kind of.
Mhm.
And so what they do is look at all food labels and USDA articles and things like that, and essentially break them down.
Mhm.
And so you might go and buy a container of yogurt from Chobani and it says live with active cultures, good with probiotics. But then you go to CSPI and they're like, okay, probiotics are good, but these certain strains aren't active in this kind of food. And
Mhm.
it's really like, they're really short articles, but they break it down in layman's terms that people can just like understand about all things food and nutrition. So, yes, CSPI, it's actually cspinet.org, and they have a magazine that's digital and physical, and it's called Nutrition Action. I think it's like their health letter too.
All right, cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. And then the last couple questions. How do you recommend someone just starting to kind of clean up their nutritional behaviors, and just like a step one in terms of like someone's looking to answer that question today and they're like, hey, I just want to start to eat better in general. What are kind of some of the things that you recommend early on?
I think it's easy to say like eat more fruits and vegetables,
Yeah.
but that's not what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
um, I would say write down your goals, write down why this is important to you, because that ultimately is going to be the cornerstone for your motivation. Is it that you don't want pain? You want to be better with athletic performance? Do you want to lose weight? And what is a motivation kind of within that? Is it that you want to have no pain so you can run around with your kids? Do you want to have better athletic performance because you want to be able to participate in a sport? That is, I think, the key, because that is what's going to be that common thread throughout the entire thing.
Yep.
And then I would recommend looking up the steps of intuitive eating, because again, if we start with your mind,
Is that a
it's going to
book?
be able to change a lot of your habits too.
Is that a book?
Intuitive eating, no, it can be a book. Like I had a textbook on it in college, but there are
Okay,
just
so
some
it's just like
general
it's actual
steps.
steps to intuitive eating. Like just like okay, all right, cool,
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
All right, that sounds cool. I agree with that totally, and I think like for me, I've solved some basic problems with myself by just like slowing down when I eat. 'Cause I tend to get really fast when I eat, and I don't even chew sometimes. And like I'll chew like 3 or 4 times and just swallow. And like I started having like stomach problems where I was getting bloated and whatnot. And then I started looking into it more, and it was just like, what, just slow down. Like it was just like chew, like actually chew. So like I started chewing, I was like, all right, I'll try it because like my stomach hurts sometimes. And then it just went away. And like the problem started to go away. And I was like, oh, all right. And like I actually thought about like maybe I should actually like sit down and like relax when I eat and not be like standing up and just going like this and then go to the next thing. And like that's what often happens with people. And I don't think people understand in terms of digestion how big of a deal that is, because eating is one thing and then digesting is like a completely different story. And like if you eat too fast, if you eat too much, if you eat you know, certain foods together, if you eat certain things at different times, like you're gonna digest different amounts of it. And like if you don't eat slow enough and you're basically putting, so basically what happens when you eat food is you put it in your mouth, you chew it, it starts that digestion process with saliva, it goes down your throat into your stomach, and then it turns into like this bolus, I think it's called, and then it starts to be decompressed into waste, and then like it takes what it needs as it goes through the intestines. And through that process, if it's not broken down enough, the body's only going to break it down so much, and it's only going to be able to break it down so much. And then if you have pieces of food that are just not chewed, and the whole point of chewing is to break it down enough so your body doesn't have that hard of a time like digesting it. If you just start swallowing whole food and not chewing it, you're gonna have some painful nights. Let me tell you, painful nights in the toilet, painful nights in your stomach. And like, you need to sit down and be more aware, like Mary was just saying, like intuitive eating is definitely something I would 100% recommend, because it's one of those things that can solve a ton of problems. And a lot of people now are like this when they eat, or they're looking at the
Yeah.
TV when they eat, or they're not actually having conversation, or they're watching videos. And I fall victim to it as well. Like I'm here by myself. So like I'll eat and I'll watch a video, or I'll eat and I'll like look at something. And like, I try to, as much as I can, be aware of that and not do it. But like for me, just being able to understand, and like, the journal thing's really cool, because writing down what you feel is another cool way to kind of be more aware of your food. But also, like for me, I read something the other day about like actually kind of like tasting your food, like tasting what it tastes like, what it feels like to chew it, kind of like what it feels like, and putting your fork down each time. It's like take a bite and then put your fork down and just chew and just kind of like taste what you're tasting, feel what you're feeling. Um, and like that's hard for a lot of people, because in today's day and age, it's like, what's next? What do I have to do next? It's like, all right, I'm eating, but like, what do I have to do right after this? And then like, what do I have to do right after I'm done eating and I do my next task, and they're just thinking so far ahead. And again, I fall victim to this. And like for me, I've tried to take in a lot of my time and really um, dove down into enjoying the time that I do have for it, and then putting more awareness into it. So giving you those, or you giving those tips, if someone wanted to reach you specifically or ask questions or work with you in any kind of way, um, how would they do that?
Yeah, I would say probably my Instagram is the easiest way to contact me at this point. My Instagram is just finding Mary Anna. And there's a contact section where you can email me. So if you click on that, or just straightforward, the email is, which eventually maybe I'll change, but it's MARWHY contact@gmail.com. So it spells MARY contact@gmail.com.
All right, cool. And do you have anything specifically that you do now with people, or is there anything that you have in terms of, you know, uh, that people can reach out in terms of resources for yourself, like besides Instagram? Is there anything you have like article wise, or up now?
Like a different way of contacting me?
I wasn't sure if you had like I've written some blogs and whatnot. I wasn't sure if you had anything like that.
I mean, not particularly. I've had like a couple projects for my internship that are on like
Cool.
a grocery store website.
Okay.
um, but they're a little hard to find. But if anybody wants them, I can definitely like
All
send
right,
them
cool.
their way.
Yeah, and I would definitely reach out. Check out her Instagram. She's always cooking cool foods. She's always got cool stuff on there. But yeah, definitely check her out. And if you guys have any specific questions on nutrition, I'd love to shoot them Mary's way. We can do this again. Maybe we can do like a Q&A or something like that. I can get some more questions specifically that people are like looking to ask. Because I think it's important, especially being a vegetarian and going through that process, that the people who want to make that change are doing it correctly, and they're getting everything that they need micronutrient wise and macronutrient wise. And then also just being a little bit more aware and conscious of the decisions they're making. Because a lot of times, people can become vegetarian or make that transition, but be doing it in a way that's like, they're eating like different food, like, like, I don't know your opinion on Beyond Meat, but like, it's something that's like, it's good in its nature, but I don't know if it's good at its core. Like if it's really beneficial for someone to be eating something like that. And I don't, and again, I haven't looked into it enough, so I don't know per se, and I don't know if you know about it, but like talking about something like that is like it's produced in like somewhere else, and it's made to look like meat, and it's made to taste like meat and feel like meat and like represent meat, and it's like how close do you get without like you know pushing something like that and being like, all right, like, yeah, you should do that. Or like, no, there's really a better option. You know what I mean? And like,
Right.
that's stuff that, I'm sure she can answer for you. And if you want to answer that quick, you can. But, like I said, I really think you guys should check her out, ask her questions. She's got Q&As running all the time on her Instagram. You can always ask her questions there. She'll answer it for you. Any closing remarks?
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Yeah, we'll do it again. We'll definitely do it again. I'm trying to, after I made this move, it was, a bit crazy trying to get people on, but I'm starting to get back into the swing of it and have people on again. So we'll definitely do this again. Like I said, next time I'll plan something, and if you want to plan something too, maybe we can do a little bit more like a Q&A and just have like stuff that we actually are like specifically answering for people. And we can kind of go from there. But I definitely appreciate you coming on. This was fun, and we will do it again soon. Again, questions, reach out to me or at Finding Mary Anna, or the email button on her Instagram. You can sit there and hit that, and you can send her an email there. But I will talk to you guys soon. Check this out. Let you know when this is going up. But we got a couple other things coming up with Killian Hamilton. If you haven't listened to that podcast, please do. And then the fight cast, as always, with me and Jake. Go over all the fights coming up this weekend. I'll talk to you guys next time. Peace.